In the heart of Brazil's most famous city lies one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in Latin America. Born out of political struggle and prison oppression, the Comando Vermelho, or Red Command, has ruled the streets of Rio for over 4 decades. This is not just a story of drugs and violence. This is the story of a rebellion that turned into an empire. 1. Birth in chaos. The Prison Alliance. In the 1970s, under Brazil's harsh military regime, dissent was not tolerated. Political activists, guerrilla fighters, and revolutionaries were thrown into prison alongside bank robbers and murderers. One such prison was the infamous Ilha Grande, located on an island off the coast of Rio. Cut to an aerial view of Ilha Grande. Inside the crumbling walls of Candido Mendes prison, ideological revolutionaries met ruthless criminals. The merger of Marxist ideology and street survival gave birth to a new order, a brotherhood that would become Comando Vermelho. Interview snippets with historians and former inmates. It started as a movement of mutual protection and resistance inside the prison. The leftists taught the criminals discipline, organization, and a belief in collective power. Show sketches of prison cells, coded graffiti, and maps illustrating the spread of influence. The narrator continues. What began as solidarity turned into structure. The criminals adopted military tactics, learned to plan, and envisioned a world beyond the bars. The prison became a university of crime. 2. The favela network. A shadow empire rises. When the prison doors opened, a different kind of threat walked free. These were not just released inmates. They were trained tacticians, molded by revolution and hungry for power. Their battlefield? The favelas, Brazil's forgotten cities within cities. In the 1980s, Brazil was transitioning from dictatorship to democracy. But the favelas remained neglected. With no schools, no jobs, and no state presence, Comando Vermelho found fertile ground. They offered something the government didn't: protection, opportunity, and justice on their terms. What began as protection quickly morphed into domination. The CV set strict codes of conduct: no stealing from neighbors, no harming locals. But they enforced it with terrifying brutality. The Red Command walked a tightrope between fear and favor. They built community centers, hosted bail funk parties, and provided food baskets. Yet, behind the generosity was a brutal truth. They owned everything. And if you crossed them, you disappeared. From Rocinha to Complexo do Alameo, the Red Command expanded with military precision. Using walkie-talkies, radios, and scouts, they maintained order and launched coordinated raids against rivals and the police. They instituted taxes on business owners, charged rent to tenants, and mediated disputes. They became a parallel government, one not elected but feared into existence. Some say the favelas were safer under CV, but safety built on blood cannot last. For every meal they served, someone vanished. For every dance party thrown, a gun was cocked. 3. Drug trafficking and criminal dominance. In the 1980s and 1990s, Comando Vermelho's influence transcended Rio's favelas and entered the murky world of international drug trade. As global demand for cocaine soared, Brazil became a key player in the trafficking of this lucrative commodity, with the Red Command at the helm. The Red Command's involvement in the cocaine trade was not just an extension of their power on the streets. It was a game changer. Cocaine became their new currency, their key to unimaginable wealth and influence. As the drug trade blossomed, the Red Command developed intricate smuggling operations. Cargo ships, airplanes, even submarines, nothing was off limits. Their reach grew beyond Brazil's borders. Connections were established with drug cartels from Colombia, and soon, the Red Command was trafficking cocaine to not only South America, but to European ports. Money flowed in by the billions. By the late 1990s, Comando Vermelho had solidified itself as one of the most powerful cartels in the world. They weren't just another street gang. They had transformed into a sophisticated criminal empire with a military-grade infrastructure. Armed with the best weapons and resources, CV turned its attention to the defense of its empire. They operated like a cartel, hierarchical, organized, and ruthless. The international scope of Comando Vermelho's operations became undeniable. They had their fingers in multiple pies: drug trafficking, arms dealing, extortion, and even money laundering. The drug trade had made them both feared and respected in equal measure. While the CV's leaders lived lives of excess, the people of Rio's favelas faced a daily struggle for survival. The contrast between their lives and the gang's lavish wealth sparked resentment and admiration in equal measure. The Red Command's control over the favelas extended far beyond the trade of drugs. They began to enforce their own justice, taking it upon themselves to settle disputes, protect local businesses, and punish anyone who dared defy them. But with power came corruption and brutality. Those who disobeyed the rules of the Red Command often paid the ultimate price: violence, murder, or forced exile. The community's need for protection became intertwined with fear and control. As Comando Vermelho's drug empire continued to expand, they became not only a powerful force in Brazil, but a symbol of the larger problems plaguing the country. Poverty, crime, and corruption had created the perfect environment for a criminal organization to thrive. But as the empire grew, so did its enemies. Rival gangs, law enforcement, and even its own members would eventually question the cost of loyalty to such a dangerous cause. For war on the streets, rivals, and rebellions. As the 2000s unfolded, Comando Vermelho's hold over Rio de Janeiro began to face unprecedented challenges. The arrival of rival factions, most notably the Primeiro Comando de Capital, PCC, from Sao Paulo, escalated the bloodshed and turned the streets of Rio into a battleground. The Red Command, which had once been an unstoppable force, now found itself at war with others seeking to take its place at the top. The rivalry between CV and PCC would ignite a wave of violence that left the city in chaos. The rivalry between Comando Vermelho and the Primeiro Comando de Capital wasn't just about territory. It was about control of Brazil's most valuable resources: drugs, money, and power. With the PCC's emergence, the balance of power in Brazil's criminal underworld began to shift. What had started as a localized fight between Rio's gangs evolved into a national war between the two most powerful criminal organizations in Brazil. The streets of Rio, already teetering on the brink of lawlessness, were now engulfed in a violent war between two powerful factions. Shootouts between CV and PCC became a regular occurrence, and the city's residents were caught in the crossfire. The violence spread beyond the favelas as well. Shootouts in broad daylight, car bombs, and assassination attempts on high-ranking gang members became commonplace. Civilians, those caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, paid the highest price. The PCC wasn't content with simply competing for Rio's favelas. Their sights were set higher. They began to expand their network across Brazil, forging alliances with smaller gangs and rival groups, setting the stage for an all-out war for control over the nation's criminal economy. As the battle for control raged on, the impact was felt beyond the favelas. Entire neighborhoods were overtaken by violence. The drug trade grew even more brutal, with each gang seeking dominance over the other. The streets of Rio and Sao Paulo became battlegrounds where blood was spilled in the name of power. Control of territory meant control of money, and both the PCC and CV understood that. With their revenue from drug trafficking, extortion, and racketeering, they were able to fund military-grade operations that could challenge even the state's security forces. As law enforcement waged a relentless war against both gangs, the cost was steep. Thousands of lives were lost in the struggle for control. Innocent civilians who had nothing to do with the gang's war, but suffered nonetheless. In the wake of the war between Comando Vermelho and the PCC, the Brazilian government was forced to reassess its approach. The once sophisticated criminal empire now faced a new reality. The state was pushing back with all its might. The battle for Rio and the rest of Brazil continued, but a fundamental shift had begun. Both Comando Vermelho and PCC were beginning to face mounting pressure from both law enforcement and society. But with new alliances, rising numbers of recruits, and an ever-growing economy, the gangs would not give up their dominance without a fight. The streets of Rio are far from calm, but the war between the gangs, the Comando Vermelho and PCC, has made one thing clear. This is not just a battle for control. It's a battle for survival, for power, and for dominance. The people of Brazil find themselves stuck in the middle of a war they never asked for, one that has ravaged their communities and taken too many innocent lives. 5. State response and the military occupation. As the violence between Comando Vermelho and the PCC spiraled out of control, the Brazilian government found itself facing an unprecedented crisis. The favelas, once places of cultural richness and community, had become war zones. With innocent lives at stake, the state's response was swift, forceful, and highly controversial. The government's response to the criminal war was to send in the military. The state declared a war on crime, sending heavily armed forces into the heart of the favelas to combat the gangs. It was an all-out military occupation. The Brazilian authorities flooded the favelas with soldiers and police units. The military occupation, led by the BOPE, was meant to restore order, but it often created more chaos. The gangs, well-armed and deeply entrenched in the communities, were prepared for a long fight. BOPE, notorious for its brutal tactics, became the face of the state's response to gang violence. With their swift raids, they would enter favela neighborhoods in armored vehicles, sweeping through entire blocks with overwhelming force. The intent was clear: to break the gang's control over the streets. But the cost of this approach was high. The military's presence in the favelas, while meant to neutralize the gangs, often led to collateral damage. Homes were destroyed, innocent civilians were caught in crossfires, and a deep mistrust between the community and the authorities grew. The state's aggressive response caused massive civilian suffering. For many residents, the police and military forces were just as much of a threat as the gangs. As one favela resident explained, "When the police come, they don't come to protect, they come to fight. We become the victims of everyone's war." The government's heavy-handed approach had unintended consequences. While they succeeded in capturing and killing some high-ranking gang members, the military occupation did little to address the root causes of the violence. The residents, isolated and disenfranchised, began to see the state as an enemy rather than an ally. Despite the government's claims of progress, many residents of Rio's favelas rejected the occupation. They didn't want military rule, they wanted social change. The state's military tactics had alienated the very people it was supposed to protect. The government, however, continued to claim that the military occupation was necessary for restoring peace to the favelas. For them, the battle was one of security, not social reform. The state's military occupation was not without its successes. Some key gang leaders were captured or killed, and certain territories once under gang control were taken back. But the long-term results were less clear. The problem of gang violence and poverty was far from over. Even as military forces took control of the streets, the underlying issues, poverty, lack of education, and social exclusion, remained unsolved. The gangs continued to recruit young people, offering them a sense of purpose and protection in a society that had abandoned them. Across Rio, some grassroots organizations and community leaders stepped up. They tried to provide alternatives for the youth, programs in education, sports, and cultural activities that offered a chance to escape the cycle of crime. The military occupation and subsequent efforts to address gang violence in Rio were a turning point in Brazil's battle against organized crime. But they also highlighted the deeper issues of social inequality that perpetuated this violence. While the government fought for control, the people of Rio struggled for justice. And it was clear, to win the war on crime, Brazil needed to do more than just fight on the streets. They needed to fight for social change. 6. Cultural identity and social impact. Comando Vermelho's influence was not limited to the streets, the favelas, or the violent drug trade. Over the decades, the Red Command became woven into the very fabric of Brazil's cultural identity. Its impact, though rooted in crime and violence, reverberated in music, fashion, and art. It represented something much bigger than just a gang. It became a symbol of defiance, survival, and rebellion against the system. In the favelas, life was not just about surviving the daily struggle. It was also about expressing the community's pain, hopes, and aspirations. The Red Command became intertwined with this expression. As crime and poverty enveloped the streets, it was the gang's influence that shaped much of the youth culture in these areas. Graffiti, once a symbol of rebellion, became a canvas for gang influence. The Red Command's logo, a red handprint or sometimes a stylized skull, was painted across walls, representing their dominance and their message. They were not just criminals. They were rebels fighting against a system that had abandoned their people. Music, particularly funk, became one of the most prominent cultural expressions influenced by the Red Command. Funk parties, often held in the heart of the favelas, were more than just social gatherings. They were protests, celebrations, and affirmations of identity. And the lyrics? They told stories of struggle, survival, and rebellion, often with explicit references to the power dynamics between the police, the gangs, and the people. Funk artists, some of whom were directly influenced by the world of the Red Command, sang about the realities of favela life. Their lyrics spoke to the violence, the oppression, and the anger that permeated the streets. Yet at the same time, they celebrated the resilience of the people living in these communities. Funk music wasn't just played at parties. It was part of the daily soundtrack of life in the favelas. The lyrics of these songs, filled with references to the Red Command, resonated with youth who felt abandoned by society. It was their way of reclaiming power, speaking out, and asserting their identity in a world that had ignored them. The influence of the Red Command extended to the world of cinema as well. Movies like City of God and Elite Squad brought the gritty reality of Brazil's favelas and their violent underworld to the international stage. While these films portrayed the struggle and the savagery of gang life, they also captured the resilience and sense of belonging that many in the favelas felt. Despite the Red Command's influence, there were those in the favelas who refused to accept the idea that crime was the only way to survive. Many community leaders, social workers, and activists sought to break the cycle of violence and offer the youth of Rio an alternative to joining the gangs. As much as the Red Command had embedded itself into the culture of the favelas, it also served as a reminder of the stark contrast between those in power and those fighting for survival. While Brazil's elite thrived in their gated communities and luxury resorts, the people in the favelas were left to fend for themselves, with the Red Command stepping in to fill the void. The cultural identity shaped by the Red Command, though deeply ingrained in the lives of many favela residents, also became a rallying cry for social change. The real solution to the violence in Rio wasn't more police or military occupation. It was addressing the inequality that allowed the Red Command and other gangs to flourish in the first place. The cultural impact of the Red Command is undeniable. From music to art to film, its influence on Brazilian society, particularly in the favelas, is profound. But as the legacy of the Red Command lingers in the background of Rio's urban landscape, it serves as a reminder that real change must come from within. If the cycle of violence is to end, Brazil must provide its people with the opportunities and support they need to break free from the grip of crime and poverty.